Welcome to Independence for America with your host, Mike Cantwell.
All right, another episode of Independence for America. I'd like to welcome Jason Grenn to Independence for America podcast. Jason served as an independent member of the Alaska House of Representatives for the 22nd District. He beat incumbent Republican Liz Vasquez in 2016 and was narrowly defeated by Republican Sarah Rasmussen in 2018. In 2019, Jason became the executive director of Alaskans for Better Elections, a group advocating for reforms like nonpartisan primaries and ranked choice voting. These reforms were passed in November 2020, and Alaskans for Better Elections converted into a voter education group. Jason, welcome to Independence for America.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
All right, Jason, tell us a little bit about your background. Where'd you grow up and where do you live now?
Yeah, so I'm born and raised Alaskan, fourth generation Alaskan, there in Anchorage, and where I got to serve, actually. So where I went to high school in Anchorage, I actually got to serve as my state rep, which was a really big honor. But grew up in a kind of a normal conservative household, lower middle class. Politics wasn't really a big issue in our house. But as I got into high school, my dad started working in politics more, and I started learning more about it. I was a registered Republican until I changed to be an independent when I ran for office. But I've got a wife. I've been married for about almost 20 years now. I've got 3 kids who are all in elementary school. And for some personal reasons, I'm actually now living just north of Seattle in Washington, taking care of some family stuff now. But still miss home, still call Alaska my home, but here in Washington now.
All right. Well, let's think back to 2016. Take me through your decision-making process to run for office in 2016.
Yeah, the political environment in Alaska was from a public standpoint, there was a lot of just partisan bickering, finger pointing, and Alaska at that time, and still is actually just in a huge fiscal mess, running billion-dollar deficits. Nothing could get done because no one wanted to take the tough votes or really kind of go towards some solutions. Everyone's focused on their reelection. And I was just a neighborhood guy, like I said, born and raised in Anchorage, but really concerned about the quality of life for my neighbors and my kids who were entering school age at that time. And the incumbent in my district was someone who, really was, a politician who thinks, that they get to stay in that seat for as long as they want. It's a Republican leaning district. She was a Republican, but dozens and hundreds of emails would go unanswered. She wouldn't show up for constituent events. She would miss dozens of votes on the House floor. And for someone like me who, again, just kind of wanted something to be done that would kind of put Alaska back on track, I started talking to my neighbors about trying to get someone to run against her, what that would look like. I had a job, a mortgage, kids. I wasn't going to be the person who could run. And the deadline day to sign up to run for office, about a half an hour before the deadline, I'd had some conversations with my wife and friends, and no one, she was running unopposed, which, for people who love democracy, that's just like the worst thing, getting these guys a free pass, especially when you don't think they're doing a good job. And so half hour before the deadline, signed up, went back to my office. I had to quit my job because they wouldn't allow me to run and work at the same time. So took the leap. And switched to an independent running at that time. One, because of some of the structure at that time in Alaska, really was going to be tough sledding to run against a Republican in a Republican district, as another fellow Republican. But truthfully, no one cares about your party affiliation until you run for office, is what I found out. No one asked me what party I was. And I found myself to be kind of a centrist, type of person, some fiscal issues, conservative, some social issues, more progressive. And so I never had thought about changing my party registration until I ran for office, and then understanding the structure and how hard it was, good and bad, and some advantages and disadvantages, but switched to become an independent, really in a way that said, I get to have conversations with my neighbors. It's more true to who I am, just being a nonpartisan, independent voter. And I want to have conversations with voters and have, if I ended up winning, being able to act independently and not really have to think about a party platform, because even at that time, as a registered Republican, I wasn't a party guy or sworn to the party platform. I really was kind of what I thought like many Alaskans, if kind of a free thinker, and just wanted to run for office and have it reflect who I was and my values.
So tell us some of the nuts and bolts. So did you get a campaign manager, raising money, and were you surprised that you won in 2016?
Yeah, the first few weeks, I didn't really know much of what to do. No money. I'm not independently wealthy or anything. I worked in the nonprofit sector, and like I said, I had 3 kids. That's where most of my money went. So I couldn't just dump tens of thousands of dollars of my own money into a campaign. And all I had was an Excel spreadsheet with the voter registration guide from our Division of Elections. I didn't have the fancy apps that the parties have access to, or voter information and intel about who to knock and who's the super voters and everything. I had a binder with voters and their address and their party affiliation. And I literally knocked on every door in my neighborhood, about 8,000 doors, twice in a summer.
Wow.
Every day after work, I would go out. I was still keeping my job as they found a replacement for me. But after work, I'd have some dinner and I'd go out door knocking for 3 hours every day, Monday through Friday, Saturdays and Sundays.
There's a lot of hours of daylight in Alaska in the summertime, right?
In the summertime, you can be okay knocking on a door in Alaska till 8:30, 9:30. Yeah. And so definitely an advantage that you have to take advantage of in Alaska. But I just, was knocking on doors, and it didn't matter if they, because I couldn't afford not to talk to every voter. Running in a 3-way race, really for me, it was that difference. What really was the difference maker was those conversations you would have with 1 time, 2 times, 3 times with a person. And you find that common ground because they have to ask you questions. They can't assume you are going to vote a certain way, and you don't assume that they're a certain way just because they have a letter next to their name. And Alaska, is a pretty, as I mentioned, very independent state. About 60+% of the voters in Alaska don't belong to one of the 2 major parties. And those that do, you can kind of be a little squishy. You have Democrats who are very strong proponents of gun rights. And then you have Republicans who are, very, very interested in pro-choice issues because, what the Constitution allows for Alaska. So you do have to have those conversations. You can't assume to everyone. So when I knocked on doors, people would ask, what's an independent? And you got to have that conversation. You really got to explain yourself as opposed to, oh, you're an R or a D, and I know you're not for me. And we, eventually was able to raise money and really kind of show myself to be a serious candidate. I think the hardest thing for independents is how do you convince someone that you're not just a wasted vote. You're not just a third party spoiler, that you actually have a chance to win. And I want to use my vote for someone who has a chance of winning. I want to show support to someone who I can be proud of and send to your state capital. So we were able to, start raising money and start getting the attention of a lot of people, and was able to get a campaign team and lots of volunteers and things like that. And a real legitimate campaign towards the end. It was a Republican leaning district with a Republican incumbent the same year that President Trump won. So were we surprised that we won? Yes, in some ways. But there was other times the incumbent was so disengaged. Right. The incumbent was not knocking on doors. The incumbent was not fundraising. It was kind of, well, I'm the Republican in the Republican district. I'm going to win. Why would I work hard and do all these things? Right. And we just kept climbing the mountain. And so there's some days I thought we should have won by more. Like we were working harder. We were the better candidate. We were talking about the issues, doing the hard work. But as politics is, it's, the voter makeup is the voter makeup. And sometimes it's just real tough sledding. I mean, that's especially as an independent. So we were surprised we won. We ended up winning, I think, by 3 or 4%, 600-700 votes, something like that. And I think, again, it was that knocking on doors, just having face-to-face conversations. Again, I lived in a big city, kind of the neighborhood. You could knock on doors. You could kind of get to know your neighbors. You run into them to the parks, the schools, your grocery stores and stuff. So, but just being a person, wanting to talk, wanting to work hard, especially in juxtaposition to the incumbent. That's how we painted ourselves, as the kind of the neighborhood guy who's just going to work hard and listen. And that's all I think voters at that time were ready for that change.
All right, so you get sworn in, you start, you go to the state house in Juneau, which is a whole nother story of like, getting to the state house in Juneau is not easy, right? And then you're on committees, you're doing the work of a state rep. Tell us a little bit more about some of that work in the state house, and also maybe even working with Governor Walker, things like that.
Yeah, so the state house and the state senate in Alaska are small. In fact, I think they're smallest in the nation. We have 40 state house members and 20 state senators. And so you get to know your fellow colleagues pretty close, and you can meet with them and meet with all of them and get to know them very well. So I was able to join a bipartisan, kind of tripartisan coalition to take over the majority of the state house. It was a majority of Democrats, but also Republicans and other independents who joined up to create the majority in the state house when I was serving. And so I sat on the finance committee, and as a freshman, that's not a committee they give to freshmen often, but the number one reason I was running was because of the fiscal issues. I wasn't there for personal legislation or to help my brand or, my background as a lawyer. I wanted to change, be in the judiciary committees or anything like that. I wanted to help be in, part of the process to worry about our fiscal mess. So I was on the finance committee. Everything that has a budget or has a fiscal note to it, you saw every piece of legislation, but you also worked on trying to fill this budget deficit. Alaska has no state income tax. We have no state sales tax. We give out a check every year from our oil dividends to every person. So there's a lot of kind of, screwy things up here that, we have some levers to pull, and we want to, but those are hard votes to say more taxes or things like that. But again, I use a line that Governor Walker used, a fellow independent when he was governor when I was there. And he always said to me, and out loud to people was, he was there to do the job, not to keep the job. Right. And that was my mentality too. It was like, I'm not running to be Mr. Popular or to kind of, have this 10-year career. We need people who are willing to do the job to get Alaska back on track. And that really was the mentality. And so, again, my mentality was we're going to go, work on the fiscal stuff, and I'm going to be the most transparent, communicative, constituent relations person in this building, handwritten notes nonstop, talking about why I voted certain ways on bills on Facebook, not just saying I voted yes, but here's why, here's the justification. Facebook Lives,
you didn't have every party leadership telling you what you should vote for, right?
No, I didn't have any party, gatekeeper or saying, hey, you need to vote this way, or you need to, mind your P's and Q's and, calm down but I also would have people come into my office who said, hey, last time we ran ads against you, vote this way, and we won't. Mm-hmm. I mean, I got this front row seat, kind of a naive guy running for office, trying to fix stuff. You really kind of get behind the curtain. You can see, what the parties will do when you're running as an independent, especially because, it's not good for them because people start thinking for themselves or start thinking that they can vote a certain way that doesn't help the base or doesn't help their fundraising out. It kind of scares them a little bit. But, the work that I had, I talked to my other fellow people who were party, who were part of a party who say, hey, that's a great bill, or I'd love to vote that way, but I can't. Right. I mean, it's kind of cliche when you go, oh, people don't act that way. And I'm telling you, they do. There's people who really say, I can't vote that way. The party will just, drag me behind the woodshed if I do it this way. Or I don't want to lose my closed primary. They will use that against me in a closed primary race, this vote, if I vote that way. So, hey, good policy, Jason, but I can't vote for it.
In a way, were they a little bit jealous of you that you had the freedom to do what you wanted to do?
I had several people, and even since, I had several colleagues who moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans who'd say, hey, tell me more about running as independent. How hard was it? Or really, well, I really can't because, that first check the party sends me when I run for reelection, that $5,000, $10,000 check they can send me, that really helps. Mm-hmm. And I need that to run. Or, if I don't run, I don't get all the, the bells and whistles or the volunteers or the fundraising lists. You really are starting from scratch, running from as independent. And again, the reforms that I started being a part of and started looking at in Alaska, you can support independent candidates and they can be great candidates, but sometimes the structure just is against them. Right. And so changing that structure, especially in Alaska, where a state, as I mentioned, has such a huge population of nonpartisan voters, changing that structure, I think was pivotal for the future of Alaska politics. And it's really something I think in 10 years, I hope we can look back on in Alaska and go, wow, that was a moment we actually started to get things done because people stopped caring about their reelection and really started caring about the policies and the people.
You and I met for the first time at the Unite Summit in Denver in 2018. Can you tell us a little bit about Unite America?
Yeah, I am a big fan of Unite America. I actually met Nick, who's their executive director, after my victory in 2016, when Unite America was actually called the Centrist Project. I think they were working on some different strategies at the time, but he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, I'm Nick. I'm part of this group, that promotes and works with independents. And I just found out about your story and what happened up in Alaska. And I got to tell you, that's kind of shocking. And can you tell me more?" And I just started learning about what they do and sharing about what was going on in Alaska and some of the momentum in terms of the independent type of attitude in Alaska. And like I said, started watching what Unite America does and just became a big fan of they really are a organization that I think in the last 4 years, if you look at their history and their growth and their impact, really care about people. They care about voters, and they want voters to have a loud voice, and they want independently minded, or at least kind of elected officials who want to hear both sides and go through analysis when they vote on policy, and really want the best for their district or for their state. And so, Unite America, luckily was still able to work with them during my work on some of the election reforms in Alaska, and good friends with many of them too, just, because they're great people who, like I said, really care about voters and really care about getting states and even America as a whole, back on track and not so finger pointy partisanship work.
So you decided to run for re-election in 2018. What happened with your election, and what did you do after that?
Yeah, I decided to run for re-election. When I was on the fence, people always say, well, of course you'll run for re-election. You're the incumbent. And like I said, I had 3 small kids. I had a wife. Being in Juneau, as you mentioned, Mike, is not just down the street from Anchorage. It's a hard place to live for a state capital. You literally cannot drive to our state capital. You have to drive through Canada and then get on a boat, or you can take a 2.5-hour plane ride. So it's not like you can just come home on weekends and do such. So it was hard. It was hard on the family, and talking with my wife, we decided let's do it one more time. Let's run for re-election, and that would be it. And I honestly, I really savor the work that I had with my constituents, because I would get texts and messages and people showing up at my house, literally on their bike going, "Hey, Jason, I want to talk." People grabbing me at the park. My kids always hated it, because we're playing at the park or doing something. But people who said, "Hey, we don't always agree, but I know that you're listening. I know that you honestly, when you take a vote, that you have, got all the information and you're doing what you think is best. This isn't because the party says one way, or you're just this rubber stamp, or you really don't care. You're just voting how you want. We disagree on some stuff, but I really, respect what you're doing and hope you will run for re-election." And that was really kind of encouraging. I ended up losing, I think, 2 or 3 percentage points. It was a 3-way race. There was some. You look back now, and at the time I didn't really know it, but you hear from politicos and consultants and other people, there was some dirty tricks. And because the system allows for that, there was myself, a nonpartisan independent running, a Republican, Sarah Rasmussen, who ended up beating me. And then a gentleman who ran as a Democrat. But the time before, he's a very, very incredibly conservative gentleman, but they convinced him to run as a Democrat to steal some votes from Jason the Independent. And if you do the math, maybe some low information voters who don't really know, they're Democrats and they just vote for the Democrat. There was enough votes to kind of steal it away from me. So, in hindsight, wouldn't have changed anything we did, wouldn't have changed any votes, wouldn't have changed how we campaign, wouldn't have. I had people telling me, "Hey, switch back to a Republican now. Like, you've got the name ID, you've got the, people know you, run as a Republican, stave off these Republicans who want to run, and then win, and you'll have easy street." And I said, that's not what I'm about. I'm not, I'm not playing political games and strategy. I really am an independent. I really am a person who wants to be a nonpartisan, lawmaker, because that allows me to do what's best for what I think is best for my district. And so ended up losing by a few percentage points. Wouldn't have changed anything though. Loved every minute of it. Loved how we campaigned. Loved how we talked to people, and luckily had the chance to get on board with some ballot initiatives that, as I mentioned, and we've talked about, Mike.
So tell us about
really changing the
Alaskans
game
for election reform. Is that what it's called?
Alaskans for better elections.
Better elections. Right.
And we always joke that it's not Alaskans for perfect elections because there's no such thing. We're just Alaskans for better elections. Alaska had a closed primary system, very, as we mentioned, tough to run as an independent. You had to gather signatures. You wouldn't appear on the primary ballot. Kind of all these different challenges you have. And so what Alaska is for better elections, working with some national groups, working with some local groups, said, something's wrong with how our election system is not reflective of our voter makeup and our voter registration and really our history. We've talked about having, Governor Bill Walker, who was an independent, several times before that in Alaska's history. We've elected independent governors. We had a write-in campaign once for a U.S. senator that's kind of famous with Lisa Murkowski. She had to run as an independent because of that. Myself and others running as an independent. So we looked at the structure and said, how can we change this? How can we have these low turnout, closed primary systems. We obviously have these, first past the post general elections. What can we do about that? Is there something to be done about that? And so Alaskans for Better Elections was created as a ballot initiative to change to an open primary where the top 4 vote getters would move on to the general election. And so, let's say you have 10 people running, the top 4, regardless of their party affiliation, will move on to the general election.
How people, if they're thinking about running under the old system versus the new system, and how does that, in my mind, nonpartisan primaries, both changes for candidates who are thinking about throwing their hat in the ring, and also it affects how they campaign. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think a little bit of before. So Alaska just had their first election under this new system back in November of 2022, and leading up until that election, I think people saw it as it was in theory only or academic, and now we can say no. The proof is in the pudding. We can say, look, you had more independents run. You gave people more choices. You had more women run, and it was much more, more people of color, minorities run. And you can say it's more reflective of Alaska's just their citizenry, but also our voter and our history and who we elect generally. And I think honestly, the next election cycle we get to use it, we will see it in a even more glorious way, really. But yeah, people had a campaign different. People were running who said, well, maybe I'm not going to win, but I want to really talk about this issue. And it's not a waste of my time if I get to talk about it for the next 6 months. If I lost in a closed primary on one side running as an independent or a Democrat in the old system, I wouldn't win. And then my time is up and I don't really get to do much more. Now you have this whole election cycle to talk about it. It forces the other campaigns to talk about it, perhaps at a debate or have their answers. We saw cross promotion of different races. Mary Platola, who ran for U.S. House, her and Lisa Murkowski both publicly said, yeah, we're voting for each other. We're not in the same party, but I'm voting for her. She's a Democrat. Oh yeah, I'm voting for Lisa. She's a Republican. Saying that out loud without feeling like you were going to, hurt your own campaign. Very important to say, yeah, this is Alaska and we vote for the person. And this system allows us to do that. And so I think this next cycle in 24, you'll see even more independents run and even a greater number of candidates as a whole because of this new system. It just allows for more freedom, and it allows candidates to say, wait, you can't run to another candidate. You're going to spoil the race for me. Well, no, you're not. This top 4 system, ranked choice voting, there is no spoiler. There is no wasted vote. So the more the merrier, really. In fact, my belief is that this system drives more competition, and all of our post polling said voters found it to be more competitive than races in the past. 60% of Alaskans said these races were more competitive because, one, you don't have to do negative advertising. You're just going to talk about issues. And as a voter, you're seeing like, hey, I got more attention on me as a voter now because the R's have to talk to me, the D's have to talk to me, the independents have to talk to me, as opposed to just whoever, is next to my name on the ballot. I have to hear from everyone now. And so I think we're already seeing, and now the legislative session in Alaska is happening. where we're seeing that the results really are, we can get past the partisanship and we can focus on issues. It's already happening because of this new system, I think.
Have you received any calls from any other independent candidates that were interested in running as independents?
Yeah, obviously in Alaska, people see an independent win and they want to, know what the secret sauce was or know, how you did it. And that was even when we had all the challenges as running as an independent, what that looked like, because sometimes it was just some structural questions. Hey, I'm thinking about it, but what was it like? And then you tell people, yeah, you won't have any money, or you're going to just have an Excel spreadsheet with your voters, and it kind of scares people off. But I think this new system, again, in Alaska, it kind of encourages independence in some way, because you can say, look, I'm as viable as anyone else now. I can fundraise like anyone else. I can get endorsements like anyone else. And it really has made it a much more of a level playing field. So I think we're getting more and more inquiries, and then from around the country. I mean, again, people kind of look at Alaska and, they think of us as, some cold place that doesn't have any professional sports teams. And that's maybe all they know about us. But I think this new election system, people are going, something's going on up there. What, how can we make the changes in our state, or do those changes make sense for our state? How would it help independence in our state? How would it help have us get past some of the partisan infighting that kind of has us just spinning our wheels? And so, yeah, I bet I've talked to 25, 30 different people in different states, other people involved with the campaign are doing the same thing. I'm down here in Washington, as I mentioned, already talking to groups like Fair Vote Washington and others who are involved with trying to level the playing field and really give voters more of a voice. And so it's been encouraging. I think, 10 years ago, again, someone who wasn't involved with politics, you don't really think about it much. Like, well, how would that help change, make for a better education system, or make for a better public safety system in my state? Well, again, if you can kind of change who gets elected, who's hitting that yes and no button, it makes a big difference. And so we're getting a lot of interest from around the country of people who maybe want to know if it's possible to change it, how could it happen? And then as an independent candidate, again, what was the pros and cons and the good and the bad, and really kind of what's that one more ingredient? We always talk about kind of the drawbacks of running as an independent, but there's some positives as well. There really are.
Yeah. So you and I talked earlier about, I was telling you a little bit about Virginia, and I'm the vice president of Fair Vote Virginia, and we were part of a coalition who helped get ranked choice voting passed for primaries in Arlington, Virginia. And as soon as the primaries are done, I'm going to go hit up the Arlington County Board again and try to get them to implement it for the general election. If not in 2023, maybe in 2024. And it's really great to especially get a coalition together. It's, your organization may not have all the answers or all the money or all the manpower, but if you can get a coalition together that works well together, it really is powerful. And then we have several independents that are running for office in Virginia this year. I ran as an independent for Arlington County Board in 2021, but I hope to see more and more independents here in Virginia and throughout the country running for office. And as you said, there are a lot of positive things I just go down the street and knock on every single door. I don't have a list. I don't not talk to some people because they might be a Republican or might be a Democrat. I talk to everybody because they live in Arlington. So I'm assuming you had a similar experience up where you live.
Yeah, I tell people, running as an independent, I think it's harder. It really is. But at the same time, it's more freeing.
Right.
And it allows you to be more reflective of who you are and your values, and forces you as a candidate, which hopefully would make you a good elected official, listening to all sides of an argument, all voices. I think, again, politicians who, they run under a party label. Again, I'm not bashing parties. I think parties have a reason to exist and have some good things about them. But when you're an elected official and you feel beholden to vote a certain way only because a party wants you to, you're not being reflective of your voters, and that's what you're there to do. And running as an independent, again, ultimately for me was I got to talk to both sides of every policy debate. I got to hear from all constituents. I cared really honestly about what constituents had to say. Ultimately, it was up to me to decide, but it really allowed for me to go on that House floor, vote accordingly based on the data, the analysis, and voter feedback, as opposed to just what the party philosophy said, especially if I was worried about losing in my next race because of it. Independents really have the advantage when it comes to listening to voters and looking at the analysis of policy. And again, that's what we want as voters. We want our representation to do what's best for all of us, to do what's best for the state, and to really listen. And running as independent, like I said, it's harder, but much more freeing and more reflective of the voters in your district.
Absolutely. So, Jason, thank you so much for running for office, serving in Alaska, and for your advocacy for electoral reforms. Is there any final words you want to give to our listeners today?
Yeah, I think if you're in an area where sometimes you have to you see independents running and you think of them maybe as non-viable, or you think, well, I usually vote Republican, or I usually vote Democrat, and good for that person for running. I'd really encourage you to kind of reach out and hear what they're talking about, and see if you can support them in a way that maybe you ultimately don't vote for them, but to encourage them to tell others about them, and really kind of find who is reflective of your values, because I think there's a lot of momentum within the independent candidate and the independent election movement. And the more support they have and the more victories we see across the country, I think that momentum is going to continue to grow. You're seeing other parties pop up who kind of have that mentality. They really, that third party mentality gets a bad rap. But from an independent voter, and you want to find someone who reflects your values and you think is the best person, find ways how you can support them and tell others as well.
Absolutely. So thank you again, Jason. And I just want to tell our listeners that this episode of Independence for America is edited and produced by Adam Theo. And to our listeners, we hope you tune in for the next episode of Independence for America.